Okay, colleagues, good evening and welcome to tonight's Cabinet meeting, and welcome to those members of the public who might be viewing as well. If we could get straight into the agenda, apologies for absence, Jim.
Leader, I've received no apologies for absence.
Okay, we got the Part A of the Cabinet meeting minutes. Can we agree those? Thank you, colleagues. Disclosures of interest, I'll assume they are as written, unless anyone's going to advise otherwise. Urgent business, I've not been advised of any. And if we could, although I will be introducing, which I'm sure all members will be supportive of, an extra agenda item between agenda item 6 and 7. But with noting that, if we can move on and agree the allocation as is between Part A and B. Thank you very much. And then move on to the very, very serious issue of the fire safety in Croydon, off of the back of the tragic and awful events still so fresh in the mind at Grenfell Tower. Alison.
Thank you, Leader. This is basically a Cabinet report. I'm aware that I've spoken at a number of meetings, including our last Cabinet meeting and our full Council, about some, and indeed scrutiny, about some of the actions that the Council has taken post the Grenfell Tower. But we thought it was important that you also had something in writing that people can take away, and so it's established the ongoing work and, in fact, our commitment to carry on with this work. So, you know, as we've previously talked about, following the very tragic Grenfell Tower, I think it changed everything for most local authorities, and the need to review our fire safety, but also to ensure that it remains a priority, to ensure that this work isn't lost, that it remains a top priority for the Council. As I've previously confirmed, we're installing fire sprinklers in all of Croydon's 25 tallest council blocks, and we've now added an additional block to that. It's a sheltered housing block at 8 storeys that we thought it was important to include in the first tranche. As you're aware, in the first days after the fire, the Council were carrying out checks on our cladded blocks, and we've been reassured by all of our findings. Again, we've talked about the need to reform some housing finance if councils are going to be able to pay for some of the work that we feel is necessary. And I know that we've been joined in the opposition who've also written to ministers regarding this issue. And again, under both administrations, I think this Council has a good record of investing in fire safety for our tenants and our housing stock, and so we were in a good place to start from. We'll continue to work with the London Fire Brigade so our housing continues to meet the fire safety standards, and we will of course respond to any recommendations that emerge from the Grenfell Tower investigation, and indeed we've written today after being asked to comment on the actual investigation into the Grenfell Tower and some of the things that we feel should be included. We're continuing to provide support and services to Kensington and Chelsea from our staff here. And we visited 1,100 council blocks to carry out fire safety checks as a precaution. We continue to actively engage with our tenants and leaseholders, and the council has also set up a fire safety board to take these issues forward. I think most of the details of what we've been doing and propose to do in the future are contained in this report, and I know it's a report, and the work that we've got has had backings from both sides of this council, and I think we all want to say that we're very grateful to the considerable numbers of council officers who have been involved, both from our housing department but those that have been assisting in Kensington and Chelsea as well.
Thank you, Alison. Can I just add, because that was for a very difficult situation, a very positive response. But we are still awaiting, and I don't think I'm alone for leaders, regardless of political colour, for a response from Sajid, the Minister, on this, because we have made it very clear indeed that we need to see changes in terms of how the housing revenue account is funded, because we, like many councils otherwise, will be to pay for the sprinklers that we made a clear commitment on, it will impact, albeit over a 30-year business plan. So the need to have that change, which I know at local government level, having been at the LGA conference a couple of weeks ago or less, there is absolute, as far as I can see, support across at local government level, cross-party for those changes to be made. But clearly, in terms of practical solutions, they need to be made sooner rather than later, and not part of somebody's 3 or 5 year plan, or God forbid, longer than that. But notwithstanding that piece of lobbying, we've made it very clear indeed in Croydon what our priority is. Any questions to Alison before I move? Councillor Tim Pollar.
Thank you, Leader. Just to echo some of Councillor Butler's remarks in thanking officers for what's clearly been a lot of very hard work at a very difficult time. But on this side, as I've said before, we stand ready to do anything that would be helpful to try and assist in this situation. So thank you to officers for all of that hard work.
Lynn, do you want to... Sorry, comments?
I won't take up too long. Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to say how much I welcome this, and I think the safety of our residents is absolutely paramount, and I'm very pleased that you've documented in this paper the fantastic work that so many staff have been doing. I think it's really, really important, and I hope perhaps we'll get an update on this work as it goes forward, perhaps for next Cabinet. But the other thing I was going to suggest that I know that a lot of officers really have gone the extra mile on this one. And I'd like you to consider giving them all their birthdays off in the next financial year as a thank you.
Well, I mean, who could say no to that? But clearly I'll have to have some conversations, although to be serious, so dedicated as they be, and they may turn us down. But it's a lovely suggestion, and in the spirit of the approach, I shall make sure that is taken forward.
The Director of Finance has just said if it's on a weekend.
I think we'd be reassured to hear the accountants. It was ever thus, wasn't it? Okay. Any other comments on the paper? No. Okay. Well, if we can clearly agree this, and to respond directly to the point that was made, we will clearly be bringing back regular updates with a clearer outline of a programme of works, as well as the ongoing work with the community that lies behind that. If I can now, with your indulgence, add an extra item, and can I introduce? I don't want to embarrass you, would you mind standing up very briefly so people can see who you are? Thank you. Can we give a big round of applause to Denise, who won the LGA National Innovation Award in Birmingham 2 weeks ago for her work she's doing. It was a national award, hundreds of people entered, and we've got the winner here in Croydon, and it's Denise. So Denise is, I don't want to embarrass her further, but is clearly going to be a huge part of the future in Croydon. But the work she's doing currently around teenage pregnancy, I know there's many other strands of work as well, is what was part of the work that fed into the LGA's national recognition. And I don't always get to stand with Councillor Gary Porter and agree on everything, but on this we did. So, because he presented you with the award. But I'm just going to ask Denise to take us for a brief, and there is clearly far more detail than you're about to hear, a brief tour through some of what she's been doing.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Newman. So, good evening, my name is Denise Blair, and just going to give you a quick overview of my journey through the LG Challenge, as well as my proposal to reduce teenage pregnancies. So, the LG Challenge, as Councillor Newman said, is a national competition in which local officers compete to win a £10,000 scholarship fund. So my journey began in December last year at an assessment day in which I was selected to be one of the 10 contestants. So over the last 6 months, I have been taking part in 5 challenges to really solve real problems that face local authorities across the country. And throughout the challenges, we're split into 2 teams, and the challenge really operates in a way such as the TV programme The Apprentice. So we're split into 2 teams, and judges shadow us, and they judge us based on our 5 main areas. So innovation and problem solving, political awareness, business acumen, ability to inspire and motivate others, as well as our communication and our collaboration. So we're judged on those areas. And these were the 5 councils that we attended. So the first was Swell District Council, And we really looked at employment pathways for ex-offenders and vulnerable adults. We then did a simulation challenge for Challenge 2, which was to be the senior management team of a failing council, so called Swafford. We then went to Harrow Council to make it a food destination. We also visited Gloucester City Council and looked really at a strategy to combine social and economical regeneration to really benefit the community, and by having the community build the new services that will be developed. And the final challenge, which occurred a month ago, was really in the West Midlands Combined Authority, and it was really about engaging young people in sustainable transport. So there was a lot of learning that resulted from the last 6 months of those challenges, and the contestants that scored the highest were finalists. So thankfully, I was one of the finalists, and I competed to get the 10,000 Brooke Lockhart Scholarship Fund. And it really was to think about three main areas. How can we exchange ideas within the UK, Europe, and the US? How can we raise the status of local government within the UK? And how can we encourage successful ideas to really be implemented locally? So I developed a business case. I then did an exhibition stand where attenders of the local government conference had to vote for the ideas that they found were most favourable. And then I did a presentation to a panel of judges. So I'll just give you a very quick overview of what my proposal was. So my proposal was on creating a shared approach to reducing teenage pregnancy in England, using Croydon as an example. So at the end of the last millennium, the previous teenage pregnancy strategy was launched as due to the high and increasing rates of teenage pregnancy in England. And it had a real ambition of halving the rates of teenage pregnancies, which it did achieve in 2015. However, despite this success, England still has one of the highest rates of teenage pregnancies in comparison to the rest of Western Europe. And progress varies considerably between local authorities. So there are some local authorities which have a 70% reduction and some which have a 30% reduction. So there is a great inequality that exists between both health and education for those young people that are within those local authorities. So my proposal was really looking at narrowing that gap in that progress, because since the launch of the teenage pregnancy strategy, there's been a number of changes. So there's financial constraints that affect local authorities, there's a change in the sexual health commissioning, and also the changes in behaviours for young people in terms of their sexual attitudes. So this is very quickly just to go over. We know that best practice is about having great access to contraception. It's about having youth-friendly environments where young people can go and actually find out about their sexual health. And it's about having high-quality sex and relationship educations. So at the moment, it's based on best practice. It's difficult to determine how to apply best practice and the right mix of services within the financial envelope that we have. So the impacts of teenage pregnancy are vast. We know that unintended pregnancies substantially affect young people in terms of their emotional, their psychological, their educational prospects, and can also have quite severe impacts on their career prospects. We know that teenage mothers are 20% more likely to have no qualifications by the age of 30, and babies born to teenage mothers have a 60% higher risk of infant mortality. But all of these costs of these negative impacts are borne by the NHS and the local authority. So my proposal was really to look at, okay, what does best practice look like? What are the drivers to implement that best practice? What are the barriers since the end of the teenage pregnancy strategy? So it occurs in 5 stages. The first is really to review the literature internationally. What allows best practice to be implemented given the financial envelope? Then the second stage is really about exploring other local authorities which have significantly reduced their teenage pregnancy rates, but also continue to reduce that rate since the end of the teenage pregnancy strategy. To also explore local authorities who have not been great at reducing their teenage pregnancy rates. And also to look at America, because at the same time period, America has also significantly reduced their teenage pregnancy rates. So look at states where the rates of teenage pregnancy what are they doing? What are they implementing that we can also glean from? Third stage is really about consolidating that information and applying that to Croydon. So implementing those changes that need to be made in Croydon, whether that be at a strategic level or operational level. And the last stage is really about developing a scalable resource and working with partners to develop that scalable resource that can allow local authorities to really know what are the best practices that can be implemented given their financial envelope. So the last slide is really about the outcomes that can be gained. So we know from the teenage pregnancy strategy that every pound that was spent on that strategy resulted in £4 saved. The better coordination now of the services that we have will result in savings now, but also in the future in terms of the children. So local authorities will be able to have the right mix of services because we'll be able to implement the best practice that we can do given our financial envelope. And it will allow Croydon to test a series of innovation and improvements to strengthen the outcomes so that we can have better decision making and better outcomes for those teenagers and the children of those teenage parents. And that will have a better impact on reducing our teenage pregnancy rate. And that's everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and congratulations again. Moving on with the agenda, the July financial review, equally important piece of work. Councillor Simon Hall.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Leader. This is an opportunity for me to update Cabinet on the ongoing financial challenges that we have as a council. And it is because that we have a grip on the finances that we are, even in this tough environment, delivering on what matters to the people of Croydon. One totally new aspect in this report, which Councillor Watson I think will want to come back on later, is the Business Rates Discretionary Fund. This will allow us to limit the impact for businesses of central government's increases to business rates in this borough. And in the face of very limited guidance from central government, and in order to give businesses certainty, we have broadly mirrored the way the transitional grant has been calculated in what we propose to Cabinet to implement. I want to remind colleagues of the ongoing onslaught on Croydon and indeed the whole of local government by central government. By 2019-20, we will have lost 3/4 of our grant funding. And this scale of cut is not being imposed on any other part of government by central government. For Croydon, this cut is exacerbated by the fact that our population is growing rapidly and the level of need for services for our residents is rising. There is also the double whammy of this happening at the same time as the NHS in Croydon is chronically underfunded, and that even in the face of the unclear announcement today in Parliament about schools, that our schools funding may well be cut on a per pupil basis. I want to also remind people of the graph that we've shown before, the table we've shown before, which is our underfunding compared to other London authorities. We have inner London needs, but we're doing this on an outer London funding level. I mean, for example, if we had the per head funding of Wandsworth, the lowest inner London borough in terms of funding per head, we would have an extra £28 million. And if we were the inner London average, we would have 80 to 90 million more to spend. Imagine what we could deliver with that extra funding to the people of Croydon. And, before the opposition says that the grant is only one element of funding, the government's own preferred measure of local government, which is core spending power, shows a 15% real terms decline over the 5-year period, even assuming that the maximum level allowed for council tax and adult social care precept is imposed. If we were not to do that, then it would be over 20% real terms cut. In terms of budget delivery, we have had very challenging times, and in those challenging times, we've delivered a small underspend this year, and over the course of 3 years, a £291,000 underspend. And this is contrary to the predictions of the opposition and despite the impact of government decisions such as welfare reform, which has so affected the demand for many services. And I wanted to take this opportunity to pay tribute to my colleagues in the Cabinet and to all the officers who have worked so hard to deliver this outcome without us having to resort to knee-jerk actions or cuts to frontline services, which is what we saw before. In terms of efficiency strategy, just a reminder of some of the things that we're doing to deliver that balanced budget. In terms of using our assets better, generating capital receipts, and also we are now seeing annual savings of well over £5 million a year in terms of making best use of our assets. In terms of commissioning, we're now holding suppliers to account, terminating where necessary, introducing a mixed market with things like the make or buy analysis. And we've seen from areas such as facility management and adult social care how we can make a real difference. Linked to that is the very strong contract management, where we have been imposing penalties of over £1 million between different suppliers where they have not delivered. In terms of prevention, we've got the gateway services where we have, for example, prevented over 1,000 families at risk of homelessness of losing their homes, ensured that the right solutions are found for people, and that independence is promoted. In terms of integration, even with the difficulties that the health service has locally, we have managed to sign the outcome-based commissioning for over 65s, which will ensure better pathways and savings for both the Council and the NHS. The growth zone and the use of the revolving investment fund is enabling us to contribute to the growth that's going on in this borough. In terms of commercial approach, brick by brick, the partnerships we've developed and the equipment solutions are examples of where we're promoting that. And in terms of digital, as you know, we're award-winning in terms of our work on digital, where people are choosing to shift to digital platforms. Staff are now being able to work agilely with productivity gains, as well as better decision-making, and we have massively reduced the level of digital exclusion in this borough. In terms of our capital programme, we have not held back quite rightly in this area. Residents expect us to deliver key services, so whether it's schools, whether it's homes, whether it's developing our town centres, ensuring our roads are maintained, that our leisure and cultural offer for young people are enhanced. We are investing in the future of this town. And the borrowings that we're undertaking there are investments for a purpose to deliver the ambitions that residents have. We are faced with substantial risks. The funding shortfall, as I mentioned earlier, is not just for us, but health is tens of millions short of where it should be. Inflation is rising and will put clearly a pressure on costs. And increasingly, the savings plans we have are not easy to deliver, especially where it's demand-driven services. And the growth we're seeing for demands, with an expanding population, with demographic changes and external factors that I referred to before, really does present a challenge. And in terms of unaccompanied asylum seeker children and the implementation of the Immigration Act, there is still real uncertainty as to how that's going to play out and the impact that could have on an ongoing basis on councils' services and finances. The welfare changes, even with the flaws that have been shown by the changes brought in by central government, those flaws are not being addressed, and the squeeze on our residents and therefore increased demand for services are coming through. In terms of legislation, it's very unclear what legislation, in terms of implementation, for example, of the Housing and Planning Act, and what changes to council funding will be implemented, so those are further uncertainties. And we don't know when or if the business rates devolution will come in. And in terms of Brexit, not only do we have the impact that's going to happen for the whole country, but of course London is particularly exposed. I mean, in Croydon, because we have lots of pan-European businesses and European residents, the impact may well be more. In conclusion, the situation is highly challenging and there are substantial risks that we're managing. but because we have a grip on our services, because we are ambitious and because we are innovative and because we are prepared to invest, we are still delivering for the people of Croydon. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. And those figures for how much adrift Croydon is, if we were just getting the same funding as Wandsworth, but we could name many other places, is truly shocking. And I hope we broadly had in this chamber a consensus around the need for fair funding for Croydon, which is why I was particularly shocked to see the comments of Chris Philp MP on the national media or the regional media last week, kind of saying, well, I don't really think they've actually had a cut in Croydon, and not defending Croydon's position vis-à-vis the money that still gets poured down to places like Surrey. So it's important we continue to make that case. This is a chronic, ongoing cuts to local government. To quote our colleague and the Conservative leader of the Local Government Association again, but I would stress this is not what's happening in Croydon for the reasons Councillor Simon Hall's just outlined. But Gary said at that conference last week, the way this is going on with cuts from central government, there'll be no libraries and no street lights left in the country in the next 5 years if government continues to make these cuts. So, in fairness to the Conservative leaders in across the country, overwhelmingly they share the view, certainly those who are aware of these issues that we do, that this savage cutting of local government cannot continue. If the government haven't got the message after the general election that the austerity cuts are cutting services to the bone, then I don't think they ever will do. But I am reassured to a degree that the leadership cross-party at the LGA do get that message. I'm concerned that ministers still don't, at this stage, appear to be listening to it. But thank you, Simon, for the work you and Richard and colleagues have done. Any questions to Councillor Simon Hall? Jason.
Thank you, Leader. I'm sure no one needs me to point out that there are lots of Labour-held areas of the country that get significantly more funding than us as well. I note that you never mentioned those.
No. Well, look, let's put it on the record. I'm very happy to say that Outer London cross-party needs more funding, and much as I have huge respect for the work that colleagues in Camden and Lambeth are doing, they too recognise, but not perhaps with the urgency we do, the need to address these historic funding issues. The size of the cake and how it's cut up in London is crucial, and what's happened, and I know you know this very briefly, over the last 5 years, for a whole variety of reasons, some of them positive around growth, some of them due to demographic change, some of them due to housing benefit changes. We have seen a huge population shift, and in terms of those in greater need of public services from inner to outer London. And that old London, if you like, that if it ever was permanently existed, has changed dramatically. And government, whoever national government are, need to recognise that. So absolutely make that point.
I agree with you completely on the unfair distribution of money. Croydon has always had a bad deal out of it. It still has a bad deal. You'll get no disagreement with us on that. But I could also say that our money is not necessarily just being sent to Surrey. I could list a whole load of Labour-held places. But we'll move on. I have 2 questions and 1 suggestion for you. Questions. On Section 8, there is a Table 5 departmental growth. I've queried this a number of times each time these financial reviews come up, and I will continue to do so until I feel either the figures are more realistic or until we get to the dates involved, I guess. These show future departmental growth predictions for the People Department in 2018-19 and 19-20 that I believe are completely unrealistic. Are we actually still suggesting that that is all the departmental growth is going to be in those years for the People Department? Because I think it's going to be significantly higher, and the report should recognise that. Second question, in Section 6.5, Table 4, budget gap. This shows a net budget gap of 0, but within that, it doesn't include in the council tax growth any increase in the base council tax for 2018-19, 19-20. Can we take it from that table that the council does not need to raise base council tax during those years in order to meet its budgets? Because that seems to be what the table is suggesting. And the suggestion for you, this was with regard to the local discretionary business rate relief. In 4.2.8, there's a statement that I completely agree with that says that you're going to exclude betting shops from local discretionary business rate relief because we do not want to encourage more of these type of premises to come to Croydon. I agree with you completely. Could I suggest that you could extend that exclusion to include fast food outlets within a reasonable radius of schools or educational facilities? Because I suggest it would be wrong for us to have a discretionary business rate relief going to new businesses of that type.
Okay, I'll get Councillor Hall to respond to those points, but I would make the general point that we're not setting the 2018 council budget here tonight, so we will be making those judgments nearer the time when we can look at all the pressures. Although I would also make the point that it was this administration that did take the tough decision around the adult social care precept. It wouldn't have been our choice to fund adult social care services that way, and it only goes part way to meet that funding gap that we've already talked about, but we did take those decisions to do that. But I'll get, I've seen Maria, but I'll get Councillor Simon Hall to respond on the points because there were some detailed ones there that Jason made, and then come back.
Thank you, Leader. In terms of the growth, those are the figures that we presented as part of the budget papers in February, when for the first ever time this council produced a 3-year budget. As part of the budget process for the coming year, those will be reviewed, and if there needs to be increase in those growth figures, and I agree that's quite possible, we'll present them as part of those budget proposals. In terms of the council tax, similar response really. The budget papers in February assumed 0, so that was the basis for council tax, and only the government-imposed adult social care precept being increased. So that's what we've reflected in these papers. Again, depending on what things, for example, happens in the budget this autumn and a review of the finances, that will have to be reviewed as part of the budgeting process. And on the business rates, I'll hand over to Councillor Watson on that one.
Thank you. Mark.
Yeah, well, look, when we was looking at the relief and the betting shops, I think a very clear category that we could exclude. It got slightly more complicated when you're looking at other forms of things, particularly if you then start arbitrarily deciding it's within 100 metres, 200 metres of a place. It becomes quite complicated to do that, and you have arbitrary lines drawn and unfairness and other things. So we'll see what else we can do, but I think because of the complication of trying to have a policy that is fair and clear for people to understand, I think the betting shops was the easy one to do on that. I think it is more complicated if you start looking at other issues on all sorts of other reasons for trying to exclude places.
Thank you, Mark. Maria.
Thank you very much, Leader. Councillor Hall, I couldn't quite hear all of your presentation, but could I just ask you, do you welcome the announcement from the Educational Secretary of the 1.3 billion for schools over the next 2 years? I think it's very positive, and I think that it shows that the government has in fact listened to the concerns around schools. So my first question is, do you welcome this announcement? My second, if I may, is around the I think it's over 5 million overspend on children's social care. So I see there has been growth in the budget, I think, every year, certainly for the last 3 years. And what I would ask you, are you concerned about that, and are you happy there is robust management of the department? And my third question is around slippage in the capital programme, around the academy programme, and around schools in general. I wonder if you could clarify that a bit, please. Thank you.
Before I bring Simon in, are there any other questions around the table, around that end? Lynn.
Thank you, Leader. I just wondered if you could tell me what you expect the financial impact of the Homelessness Reduction Act to be in Croydon, and has that been taken into account in the budget figures going forward?
That might require a written response, but I could be surprised. Okay, Richard or Simon, who wants to come in first?
I'll do Councillor Gatland's, and then I think Richard will be able to come back on Councillor Hale's questions. In terms of the 1.3 billion, if it is real money and actually additional money for schools, and not just, for example, transitional money or just stealing from one pot to another pot, then clearly extra funding for Croydon schools will always be welcomed. But the fact is that schools in this borough are facing, based on the previous funding formulas and the information we have to date, real crisis, facing having to lose teachers and TAs, and that is a real concern. If this is real money and it's not just going to be one-off or just a rearranging of pots, then that would be, of course, welcomed. In terms of children's social care, there's no doubt that there's considerable pressures there, and we went through this, for example, at GPAC and indeed at scrutiny in terms of those, and it will always be important to monitor that, to make sure that we're spending appropriately, and that's what we'll continue to do. In terms of the capital programme, there has been, as set out in the papers, a considerable rescheduling of the capital programme in all areas, including education. What we are satisfied, working with officers, both Councillor Fleming and myself, is that we will be delivering the schools when they're needed across the borough to ensure that the young people have the school places that they need. And as I say, for Councillor Hale's point, I'll pass over to Richard.
So we've provided information back to CLG on what we think the impact will be in Croydon of the Homelessness Reduction Act, along with a number of other councils, and we've been kind of leading the way in terms of helping London councils inform their response, I suppose. So nothing's been factored into the budget, so if the government are as good as their word in terms of funding new burdens, the impact will be covered by government in terms of an additional grant. We'll find out later in the year what the exact details of any grant settlement on that are for Croydon. But at the moment, the assumption is the new burdens funded via central government as per their policy.
Alison, do you want to add something on that?
Yeah, I think whereas the Homeless Reduction Act obviously is very welcomed by this council, although through the Gateway service we've been doing a lot of that preventive work, but there's no doubt there'll be a considerable increase in the number of people coming through the doors, and it will require a considerable increase in resources to actually ensure that their needs are met and that this results in some positive action. And we do have concerns at the moment. The amount of funding that the government has been talking about, if you're sharing that around the country, that's going to in no way meet the needs, and it is nowhere similar to where some of this work has been carried out successfully in Wales, the amount of funding that it actually cost to carry out this work. So whereas we do support this work and we are gearing up and we are prepared to assist people, although, as I've said, through the Gateway service, some of this has already been done in Croydon, we do remain concerned that we won't have the resources to make it a really effective tool for people.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, Councillor Stewart-Collins.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I just wanted to put on record my thanks to Councillor Hall, in particular, in the work that we've done around contracts. And for the first time, this council has actually started to get really tough with some of our contractors and make sure that we do bring in penalties where performance isn't so good. And I think that will stand us in good stead when a number of contracts that were drafted years ago actually come to an end, and we'll actually have tougher contracts demanding more quality service. And I think that's actually put us in a good position. But with regards to funding of local government, I agree with the Leader entirely that it's quite interesting how elections and a bad result actually makes government actually to say that we're suddenly listening, when quite often when they say they're listening, it's rather about introducing more funding and finding that magic money tree, because they want to ensure they don't lose too many votes, rather than actually believing in funding public services and funding education and funding councils. But I think I can assure everyone in this room, I know that local government everywhere is going to be screaming loud and clear, and we just hope that the national government listens and appreciates how important local government is, rather than just being because it's an election ploy or being wanted to make themselves popular. Because what is important is all of us as politicians should believe in local government funding, because local government is a fantastic tool of making people's lives better. It protects the vulnerable. It makes sure that we have decent education. It makes sure that we provide services that people depend on. And if we let local government funding, we're already in this council have heard from the Cabinet member that we've lost 3/4 of our funding from government. I mean, that is just not sustainable in the future. Another 26 million to be lost by this council by 2020. You know, all of us that believe in local government on both sides really must say to the government, this is one issue you need to listen to, because if you get this wrong, you're going to spend more money paying for the consequences of failing to give councils the money to provide decent services in the long run than you would have by the cuts you've made. So I'd just like to say thank you again, Councillor Hall, particularly as well for the work in terms of capital, where we've been able to spend capital on improving some of the machinery in my area, and that's most welcome.
Thank you, Stuart. And just in terms of the school's announcement, to reiterate, clearly we'll look at the detail. There's been a huge lobbying campaign there. But looking at YouGov's latest polling, I don't think anything Theresa May is doing at the moment is going to assist the popularity ratings, because when you've driven the country to the edge of a cliff, I don't think people are in the mood to forgive that at the moment. If we can move on then and agree that, thank you very much, Simon, for the work there, and move on to the corporate plan performance, agenda item 8, page 41. I think, you know, this is as open and as transparent a report as I think we can, you know, have brought here. If I recall the reports, I think under Steve O'Connell, you know, in the run-up to the previous local government elections, how mysteriously all sort of performance data disappeared from the radar. Steve cheerfully told us he was adjusting how it was presented. It may be an outrage, and it was an outrage, but this is a different approach. And this is us telling the story. There are clearly many things going in a very strong direction here in terms of the economic performance, the direction, the services in terms of the huge ongoing pressures we're seeing. But I think this is being open and honest in terms of we recognise there are still huge challenges out there in terms of public services, the funding settlement we've just heard, and other areas. So this is where we are at the moment, but it's a rolling report that will be back here regularly and will increasingly fill in the gaps in terms of achievement and delivery. So with that, I see Steve's championing at the bit to get in, and presumably congratulate us on this style of report, and then any comments he's got to add to that.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, Leader, on that premise, and thank you for the name check. My first question is about frequency and transparency, and thank you for quoting the much-loved Croydon Counts, which was quarterly. Now, my question to you, first of all, is about reporting cycles. You said rolling reporting. When can we next expect a full report back on the up-to-date on the performance targets as entered here? Because this seems to be an annual thing, which may be quite timely for you, because it may not come back till after the next election, which, of course, we would have won. So, first question about frequency, if I may. Then more specific questions regarding my portfolio and crime and safety, particularly in the context of a worsening crime and safety situation we find ourselves in the town. So my first question really to the Cabinet member is particularly about the lack of performance figures that seems to be permeating her portfolio, point one. Second point is some specific measures. Page 100, there's a rather dispiriting figure around proven offences by young people by ethnicity, and it saddens me to see that the B and ME is 60%, shall we say, in Croydon, which is very, very high and considerably higher than the London figure. So I'd be grateful for comments from the Cabinet member, particularly around that. However, perhaps on a brighter note, just further down on the same page, the number of incidences of hate crime hate crime, which is something which we all treat very seriously, over that year-on-year cycle, hasn't got worse, marginally worse, perhaps just by 2. And I'd be interested in the conclusions that the Cabinet member may arrive at around that. Another point I'd like to make particularly is around antisocial behaviour, an issue that blights much of our area, particularly in some of the areas of some of the estates. I regret we have no target around that. And then when we do get round to targets, one that I'm always very passionate about is confidence in policing, which I think is a really important thing for all our communities. And we seem to have arrived at a target of 66%, so 2/3 as an aspiration. And I think that's woefully low for a figure for confidence in our policing. And my final say really is, again, on that same page, which is, 119, it is really saying, and I don't completely blame the Cabinet member, because this is in tune with the present Mayor, is that there's no targets coming out of the London plan, and therefore the Cabinet member, in her defence, is quite hamstrung by the lack of targets coming from the centre. Several questions, Chairman. Thank you for your forbearance.
Look, I'll come to Cabinet colleagues in a minute, but I think we need to nail once and for all the absolute rank hypocrisy from you, particularly, Steve, on these issues. You have sat in the GLA, you have supported your members of Parliament in government as savage cuts have removed tens of thousands of police officers from the streets of this city, London. Hundreds of officers been lost in boroughs like Croydon. Police station closures imposed upon local communities. And to sit there now and take no responsibility for the most swingeing attack on the Metropolitan Police Force ever seen in a generation, and then take no responsibility for your role in decimating the Metropolitan Police in this city is an absolute disgrace. And only when and if and when I see anybody from the Conservative Party coming forward to take some responsibility. But then, of course, if we look at the now shambolic role being played by the previous Mayor of London and the national disgrace he is as the Foreign Secretary, perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that there's no apology coming forward. Your party and you in the City Hall and the GLA drove a coach and horses through the Met Police in this city, and you're now sitting there wondering why the Metropolitan Police is under pressure. Well, on this side of the chamber, we will stand shoulder to shoulder with the Metropolitan Police and not allow them to come under the sustained attack and the disgraceful political attack we're seeing from you. Councillor Hall, first on the frequency of this report.
Point of personal explanation.
No, I'm going to bring you in at the end. You've had a very long run at this.
I insist. Only
well,
today,
you can insist, but you're shouting me down. But if you insist,
Leader. Only, and well done for buying time for your Cabinet member. Leader.
What a cynical approach to politics. That's precisely what. God, Lord.
Only today, Leader, I signed a letter to the Minister on behalf of the Police and Crime Committee, cross-party, urging that the government considers a full and fair settlement for London policing. So I think you're being rather unfair in your criticism.
It's a bit late now. You voted through the cuts to them. The horse is out the stable, the doors are open, and it's disappearing over the hill. And now you recognise we need some more police officers. Absolutely extraordinary admission there. But good Lord, and as for you, the cynical approach that you bring to politics, it doesn't do you any favours at all, because I know the briefings that you've received from the Borough Commander personally around the confidence levels of police, and I know the work that you are aware of that the police are doing on that. So for you to come to this chamber, every time you're in this chamber now, you use the Metropolitan Police, having voted for cuts to them, to play political games in this chamber, whilst the residents of this borough are rightly concerned about policing levels and their security. It is a disgraceful performance. Councillor Simon Hall.
Thank you, Leader. In terms of these reports and how often they're published, Steve, I know you're only an occasional visitor to Cabinet, but they're actually published twice a year because in terms of putting together the data, and in particular the huge amount of data that we include in these, which are from partner organisations, then actually producing this data once or twice a year is the only sensible route. And just on police funding, let's not forget that the current Prime Minister postponed a £400 million a year cut to the police to try and help the Conservative candidate in last year's GLA elections, totally unsuccessfully. So, you know, it's very nice, the crocodile tears in terms of funding that you're now shedding. But actually, year on year, the Metropolitan Police has faced real-term cuts under a Conservative-led government and with the last Conservative mayor.
Thank you, Simon. I've had a moment to reflect now. I think it's one of the most extraordinary admissions I've ever heard in this chamber, that you voted through swinging cuts and now you've signed a letter saying that you possibly were wrong about them, and could somebody have a look at the cuts you voted through? What an extraordinary state of affairs. Councillor
Another point of personal explanation. The GLA member does not have executive voting powers, Tony, as well you know. Anyway, let's get some answers from the Cabinet member, shall we?
Councillor O'Connell said just now, talking of unfair, and talking of that, I'm getting a little tired of the patronising suggestion that anyone might need to buy me time in order to answer questions. But anyway, I shall continue. So a number of questions reasonably suggested by the councillor. So in terms of the lack of performance figures, as he suggests, as he well knows as the Chair of Police and Crime Committee for the London Assembly, he'll be aware that we're all waiting for more detailed performance assessments for the London-wide police and crime plan, and as a result we will be flexing our performance pack for the Safer Croydon Board, which he knows that I chair. I think that there will need to be some quite careful work to make sure that the types of crime that have been prioritised and rightly prioritised in that plan. It's not quite so straightforward as the previous arrangement, which was just looking at volume crime reductions. They're not looking at volume crime. They're looking at really complex areas, some of which are hugely underreported. So ensuring that we've got the right measurements is rightly, I'm sure, taking time to develop. And as soon as those are available, we will make sure that our performance pack reflects those. He will know that in the community safety strategy that I brought to Cabinet at the last meeting, it reflects many of the areas that have been highlighted. In terms of the issues that he raises around the ethnicity of our young people that are coming through the criminal justice system, it's widely documented, and it is a massive issue that was raised in the Stephen Lawrence Inquiry report published some 15, 16, 17 years ago, maybe a touch more, about the disproportionality of black and minority ethnic people in our criminal justice system. Those numbers look around the proportion of BME young people that we have in the borough. But we absolutely need to be making sure that as few young people are coming through the criminal justice system, because of course it influences massively their life chances, and indeed the local strategic partnership is focused on the prospects of our young people and making sure that all of them are benefiting, and that goes for the same for our, 50% odd BME population as for other residents, and I share his concerns about that. In terms of hate crime, interesting statistics in that sense, but I would say that we know that hate crime is massively underreported, and that's no different in this borough, would be my conclusion, as anywhere else. And so some of the work that we're doing to increase reporting of hate crime is absolutely right. We've got a number of voluntary sector organisations that we're working with who are doing all kinds of interesting areas of work. Citizens Advice, for example, have a national agenda to make sure that their bureaus are third-party reporting centres, and we'll be supporting that. He will remember a conversation at the Stronger Communities Partnership Board, which I chair, a discussion that we had about encouraging and supporting greater reporting of hate crime. So it's really important that metric is here in this performance pack. In terms of antisocial behaviour, you will see from the statistics that we've seen an increase in the last year, although if you look over a longer period, it's got a very clear downward trend. And we argued with the Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime to make sure that antisocial behaviour was one of the areas that the borough would be measured on, in addition to violence with injury and burglary. So that was something, in response to the concerns that all our residents raised with with us about antisocial behaviour. That will now be one of the 3 areas that Croydon Police will be measured on, in addition to the areas that all boroughs will be measured on. In terms of confidence in policing, that's something that you should be concerned with as Chair of the Police and Crime Committee for the London Assembly, and I would be as concerned as anyone to see those numbers, fluctuate to the extent that they do. I think the target, given previous performance and where performance is at the moment, is reasonable, but that's something that we can review on an ongoing basis. And I would encourage him to hold the Metropolitan Police Service to account as aggressively as anyone else, given his role, including on the confidence that our members of the public have with the police service.
Thank you, Hamida, for a very detailed answer, which I hope has informed Councillor O'Connell. Does anybody else on the side opposite want to confess to signing letters about budgets they previously cut, or do they want to make a contribution to the debate? Maria.
I haven't signed any letters as yet. Could I just ask, please, on page 62, about around schools. And first of all, can I say how much I welcome the year-on-year improvement in school results. I think it's very positive, and I think it does show the hard work of schools in general. And of course, I think the academy programme as well has helped enormously, which of course has been supported by both governments. I am a little bit disappointed to see the Ofsted ratings for primary schools drop. It says it's due to a number of schools, which I believe may be in special measures. So could you confirm why that is, please? I don't know whether it's going to be Councillor Hall or Councillor Fleming who might respond on this. Could you please tell us a little bit about those schools, why they are in special measures, and what is being done to improve the standards there, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Yvette, your questions?
Thank you. Just a couple of questions on the health indicators here. Persons presenting with late diagnosis of HIV as a red, and also vaccination rates. I did raise these last year, and I note that the same sort of mitigation is in place. We do have a high percentage of residents from sub-Saharan Africa presenting, but I wondered how we're going to get this figure down and how we're going to implement something that is perhaps going to put us more in line with London and England in terms of those figures. Thank you.
Okay. I've seen a couple of other hands, so shall I take responses to those now, then we'll come back round again. The first was on the schools piece. Elisa.
Yeah, just to point out that the reduction is a result of 2 primary schools, and as a result it has pushed down the percentage slightly, and it is something that we are working to support the schools with via Octavo. So just on the back of that page, page 63, the detail is there, and it does highlight that it is 2 schools in particular. So there is a package of support, and on top of that we have the link advisors that are going into the schools to work closely with them, not just our schools that are facing this problem, but just generally. And the idea there is that we keep all of our schools, whether they be primary or secondary, at a level where the trajectory is only upwards. So there is a package of support there, and that is open not just to, as I said, these schools that have failed, but to the other schools that are on their way to outstanding.
Thank you for that. On the issues that Yvette raised, Louisa.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I thank Councillor Hopley. We have been here, and we have been looking at the late presentation for HIV testing, and it is a fact. It's something that we can't get away from. We do have a very high percentage of people who come from sub-Saharan Africa, simply because we do have the Home Office here, and we do tend to have a higher number and percentage of people who come from certain countries. And last year, we do, as you said, it's outlined in the prose that follows the data, the steps that have been taken as regards routinely offering HIV testing within antenatal settings, etc. But we do work with Pan London, and we have the work that we've been doing has been recognised across London as being very proactive. And 3 weeks ago, for example, I was handing out certificates to our volunteers who go out into the community and engage with people, and they do undergo rigorous training. And I remember one of the things that someone said, someone that was approached said, why are you approaching me? Do I look as if I'm the sort of person who would have HIV? And people had to say, well, look, they're trained how to react to answer responses like that. And one of the people, for example, who eventually came and was tested said, do you have to pay? And when they discovered that they didn't have to pay, that person went and got 4 friends to come and have the test, because the countries from which they come, not only in some cases that service is not available, and in cases where the service is available, they do have to pay. So I referred to the fact that I was handing out certificates for people who had volunteered to go out into the community and raise awareness. And a year ago, I was handing out 20 certificates to 20 volunteers. This year, it was 60 as regards the number of people who are engaged. Yes, the figure has gone down. We have improved. Yes, there is there's some way to go, but we can't shy away from the fact that we do have a very much higher percentage of people from certain parts of the world here who as a consequence present late. As regards the rate of MMR vaccination, there has been. And we will pass to you the details of the task and finish group that we did set up last September, because the situation as regards the MMR vaccination is quite complex. We are improving links between commissioners. We're reviewing the call-recall processes in Croydon. We're exploring opportunities for health promotion. We're improving links around data. And in some cases, the data from varies between GPs. I mean, there's a GP practice, for example, in the south of the borough where one would least expect, that has a rate of 37.5. So it isn't just in the more deprived areas that there are really a low rate. So what we have done, apart from the targeting certain groups, gypsy and travel communities, for example, we've supported NHS England to visit 3 of the highest performing GPs and then 3 of the worst performing, and basically to see so that we could spread good practice, and also look at Pan London, where how we could spread good practice, because we are at 90% for the people for the youngsters who receive the first vaccination. It's when we get to the 5-year-olds, and we do have a certain group of recent arrivals and also Europeans who in some cases their 5-year-olds may well have been vaccinated in their original country, and it isn't clear whether all the data that we have is correct. But I promise you, and I don't know whether the Director of Public Health wants to add anything, that there's a detailed amount of work going on so that we could actually really drill into what is, what the data is telling us, and how we could go about improving, spreading the best practice of some GPs, some of those GPs that are where the practice is very good is in surprising areas. And as I said, I have the map here, and we'll send you the data so you can see where those practices are. Some of the practices in areas where you think it would be better, it isn't good at all. So I don't know whether...
Thank you, Rachel.
Rachel wants to add
anything at this stage. No, thank you, Louisa, for that. Indeed, I've seen a couple of others. Councillor Simon Brew, welcome to the cabinet. I don't know. I mean, I've not seen the list. Are you on instead of Councillor Thomas these days, or is he still a member of the shadow cabinet? He doesn't seem to come anymore. But anyway, Simon, it's delightful to see you here, and you'll be certainly welcome. Is he still with us?
Perhaps I may ask my question. Thank you, Leader. I was pleased to participate in the promotion of the Go On Digital campaign, and you may remember my presentation with a colleague to a previous Cabinet meeting. Looking at page 108, right at the top, it says, through D&E, we have and are surfacing more functionality. I think that means we're doing more stuff, which is eminently to be praised. My question, please, is what new functionality has been introduced recently, and what extra functionality is coming in the reasonably near future? Thank you.
Thank you. An excellent question, and you're very welcome to join us at Cabinet. Lynn.
Thank you, Leader. Just looking at the figures. I'm just looking at the figures on page 67 of the report, and I'm sure that the number of red flags against housing targets are going to be a great concern for all of us. And whilst I know it's the subject of another paper later on this evening, can you tell me, are you disappointed with the number of affordable homes delivered in the past couple of years, and also the drop in the number of empty properties returned to use in 16-17?
Jason, and then I'll get some responses.
Thank you very much, Chairman. With regard to planning, jobs and the economy, I'm surprised there's no mention of the vital Westfield-Hammerson scheme for the Whitgift Centre within the corporate plan. I know residents and businesses are increasingly concerned about the scheme, and I just think that perhaps a focus in the corporate plan would help to give a reassurance that the administration is totally behind the scheme.
Well, thank you, but I'm going to start with that one and then bring colleagues in. This administration is 100% behind the scheme, and most recently I was lucky enough, if that's the word, to co-chair a joint meeting at the GLA with Jules Pipe, the Mayor's advisor on all things regeneration, where I don't want to break too many confidences, but Westfield were very clear indeed that in terms of the Council's role in supporting the application, we could do not much more, if anything more than we're already doing. But Westfield are finishing some negotiations with some of their partners. They know, and I think you do know, but I'm very happy to repeat it publicly, that as soon as they're ready to come to Planning Committee, the officers of this Council who have worked day and night on some occasions to ensure this Council's role in that very significant investment into this borough is poised to go. And so the Council's commitment is total, but we don't actually run and manage shopping centres. We do need Westfield to finish their negotiations and bring the as a live application to the Planning Committee, and you, more than most, I think, are aware of that process. If it's on this, I'll bring you back in and then move on to the others.
If I may come back, thank you very much. I'm really pleased to hear that comment and that support. I just think it's really important that as a council, that is put out into the public domain more, because it doesn't feature in any council publications, it's not featuring any cabinet papers, it doesn't feature at full council. So at the moment there's just a lack of information around Westfield, and in that vacuum people start to make up their own minds about the scheme. So I'm very pleased to hear that you're 100% behind it and things are moving well, but you really need to communicate that with the people of the town and the businesses of the town.
Well, I don't know if it surprised you or not, but I'm very happy to share with you that Councillor Butler has, I don't know, maybe you've been talking to her, because in the last few days she's set that out in written terms to Westfield Hammerson's, and in terms of the Council putting out a statement on where we are with the process and everything that we've done. done and are poised to do. I think that's due to go out in the next 24 to 48 hours off the back of the letter that Alison's already written. So you're ahead of the curve on that one, and in a sense, I welcome the question and the opportunity to say what I've said, and we'll take it from there. Coming back to some of the questions, Simon's one and Mark on the IT piece.
Yes, just on digital enabling, I think there's a couple of things on there. I mean, one, there's the work we did that you took part in, which was actually going out into the community and getting more people. That work is, although that project come to an end, we're still doing a lot of that. We're still funding those projects, particularly for community groups to help people that are not digitally enabled to get online. But I think that was referring to sort of the services we're going to put on the council. So the web chat on the service makes it easier for people when they go on the website to get assistance with that. We just want to make it more of a seamless process. So it's getting more of those services online, but making sure that those services are easy for people to operate. I'd like to see more people downloading the app as well and reporting stuff via the app. So there's still work we're doing around that to get people to use My Account and the app. And remember, there's 180,000 people using My Account, which is half the population. But remember, a lot of people will, in one family, only one person will usually register online because only one person will buy the bins or whatever else they've got to do. So, you know, when you're looking at the uptake across the borough, I think that uptake is quite fantastic, really. And everybody that's using the online services is obviously saving us money as well. So I think what we're saying is that we've done a lot, but there's still a lot more we can do in improving those services to make it easier for people to access services online. So at the moment people come in for one service, we want to push them to the other services that you can use when they're there.
Thank you for that, Mark. Alison, on Lynn's points.
Thank you, Lynn, for your question. In answer to the first question, yeah, I am disappointed. Unfortunately, some of that has not been within our control on delivering affordable housing. We've got the figures about that huge number of market homes that were completed, but a lot of those, in fact, a huge proportion of that has come through under permitted development. And as you'll be aware, under permitted development, this council loses its right to actually ask for an affordable housing contribution from there. So in all of those homes coming through, we've lost any offer of affordable housing, but I know that's something in the town centre. It was a cross-party agreement that we didn't want to see that further, and so hopefully our figures can be somewhat changed in that. These figures have also been affected by the reduction in grant funding for affordable homes, and I'm glad to see that we're getting some more positive figures coming through from the government and from the Mayor of London about which grants that we can use. There's also certain schemes that, although they've been granted planning permission, the full 106 agreements haven't been signed off, so we were unable to include those in these figures. But we are positive for the coming year with major schemes like College Green, Taberner House and Brick by Brick coming forward that will be included. On the empty properties, yeah, we would have liked to have higher, although I am very pleased that 87 homes have been brought back into use this year. We do recognise we're not going as far as we'd like to, so we've now got plans to recruit an additional member of staff to help a very small team that you'll be aware of, and also to look at more enforcement action. As you know, it's quite complex. Sometimes it's quite easy to bring a home back into use and people are willing for the council to take that home on, do the repairs and put one of our tenants in. Sometimes it's more complex. There's a mixed ownership of a home and we actually need to proceed to court with a CPO, and that could take several years. So we're hoping that an additional member of staff will encourage and rise that figure up.
Thank you very much for that, Alison. Any further questions? No, there isn't. Okay. Sorry, Louisa. Yeah.
To make a comment on the same page, on page 67, because Alison was referring to the number of affordable housing. If I could just bring people's attention to the number of homeless households living in bed and breakfast and self-contained temporary accommodation. On the paper it says 847, but as of this week, we'd actually gone down to the target, just above the target of 758. But more importantly, the number of families in bed and breakfast for more than 6 weeks as of this week, there wasn't a single family in bed and breakfast for more than 6 weeks. So just to say huge thanks to the team, the Gateway team and the housing team who've done such, in spite of the fact that they've been doing extra work because of the Grenfell situation, they've been doing such good work with families. So just to put that on record. Thank you, Leader.
Louisa, and I'm sure we all echo that. Okay, can we agree the paper, colleagues, and move on to agenda item 9, the Safeguarding Adults and Children's Board reports. And can I ask, I'm going to ask both Louisa and start with Elisa to introduce these reports. Unfortunately, the Chair, and she has sent her sincere apologies, and I can't say more than that, can't be with us tonight, but will be with us at the next Cabinet. Elisa.
Yeah, can I ask that we note the report, which is produced annually by our independent chairs. The leader said, unfortunately, she's unable to be here today. But it's in order to evaluate the progress of the Safeguarding Board against their business plan and to consider what needs to be done to strengthen safeguarding arrangements and to promote the welfare of Croydon's children. The Board report captures evidence of the work undertaken across all the partnering agencies who work with our children within the borough, and it will now go forward to scrutiny for them to review in further detail. So we also undertook a review of the board recently that considered improvements that the board needs to make over the next 12 months that will be relevant to both this report and the future activity moving forward. The report explains the importance we're placing on the voice of the child in our future programme, and you will note the move towards the local strategic partnership and the outward voice of the young people, and indeed the Congress that we recently held. I would draw your attention to the recent Youth Congress, where over 200 young people gave their insights, and I know that there are a number of you in the room that attended there. And the views about the future of the borough and where we'll be moving to collectively. The report here comes into some considerable detail about the work done against the 10 points of the business plan, and it provides detail about the work of our Safeguarding Board. As stated, the report is here only to be noted, but it also represents a lot of the work that we need to do, and we acknowledge that it's important for the borough and the young people that are growing up here. So as the lead member, I'm here to champion the voice of the children and promote their safeguarding and well-being. And you know, just to really stress that, you know, out of the Youth Congress, it was really, really wonderful opportunity to hear the voice of the young people. And I really will commit to ensure that that voice is embedded in any work moving forward.
I know it's not directly relevant, but can I take this opportunity from the Chair, because there won't be another one for a while, to thank you, but also all the officers who did so much to make that that Youth Congress, as far as we know, one of the first such events in London, such a massive success that was led by the young people of this borough. On Thursday. Everyone I know who's been there, you know, sometimes these things are very good and then people aren't talking about them, but people are still talking about it several days later, and the actions I know are being taken forward. So thank you very much through you to all the officers who also worked on that. Can I bring in Louisa on the adults report, then I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Leader. Again, we'd like you to note the annual report, as Lisa referred to, Sarah Baker chairs the board independent. She's the independent chair and she works in partnership. We work in partnership with all our key partners, and we work to keep our vulnerable adults safe. Now, the report outlines what the board has done over the year, and it gives examples. I particularly like the examples on page 45 of my actual report, but at the front, where it has the voice of the adult risk, it does give examples of people who've been through the safeguarding, and we see there some of the work that the board has done. And it's very important to raise awareness about vulnerable adults and to let people know where and how they can get help, and how we can make a difference. And also to make sure that the relevant agencies know and relevant people know how to make a referral. Work has also happened around modern-day slavery, and there will be a conference that will be held in October. And just to end on the priorities going forward will be prevention and early identification, robust response to market failure, making safeguarding personal, and promoting the use of voice. As I say, you have some examples of the use of voice there at the start. As I said, as has been said, the chair can't be here tonight, but it will go forward to scrutiny, and I'm sure that people will be able to ask questions there. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Louisa. Thank you, Elisa. Maria, and then I'll take any others that I've seen. Maria, then Hamida. Should we do those two, and then we'll come back round again, yeah?
Thank you very much, Leader, and thank you, Elisa, for the report. Can I just say I think it's probably one of the most important things that a council can do is this safeguarding report and the safeguarding of children. So it is a very important document. I was very pleased. I think it's a good report. It's very clearly laid out, and it's one of the best, I think, that I have seen. I'm particularly pleased to see the voice of the child, excuse me, reflected in it. And it's quite interesting, I think, for those of us who attend the corporate parenting committee to see their concerns are concerns that we have often heard before. But I would flag up one thing, and that is around the looked after children's health assessments, because that was flagged up as a risk and indeed flagged up in the recent JTAI inspection as well. So I think that is something that does need looking at. The other thing is, and again, the learning from serious case reviews. And as we know, serious case reviews deal with the very worst thing often, and that is the death of a child. And it is the learning from these serious case reviews that I think is important. And I know that some of us have seen the recommendations from some of these reviews. And I think, Councillor Fleming, you will agree with me that they are very similar, often each review. So around particularly professional curiosity and multi-agency working. So in other words, sharing information between agencies. And I just wonder, when I see the same recommendations on every review, how can we move forward from this, and how can we learn from it? There is an issue around the capacity on school nurses as well, which I see in the report, which I think does need looking at. And something, and I don't know whether it comes under this review, is online safety. I didn't see much about it here. Perhaps it doesn't come under this. I listened to a very interesting programme on the protection of children and online safety, particularly where accessing porn was concerned. So I'm just wondering if any work is done around that as well. Thank you.
Okay, I'll bring Elisa in. I think the online safety is a key issue, and also very much share your views in terms of serious case reviews, because we've all read some of them, and they don't ever leave you the memories of what you read there. But shall I? Because you've raised a number of points, I'll bring Elisa in on that. Then I'll come back to Yvette. Was it? Yeah, Elisa.
Yeah. Can I just thank Councillor Gatland for her questions and indeed the comments as well. I'll start firstly with the voice of the child and the importance for me as the lead member, but indeed for everybody in this room, councillors in particular, as corporate parents, in ensuring that the voice of the child runs through all cabinet reports, not just specifically in relation to the Children's Department. So whether it is that we're speaking about housing, or whether it is indeed for Councillor Collins in his Clean and Green and the work that he does there in terms of raising the voice of the young person. And so that's just something I really think important to highlight. yes, I agree with you completely around our looked after children health assessments. I will openly say that there's much more work that needs to be done, have to increase that. It's very, very vital and important in terms of the outcomes for our looked after children moving forward and the impact that it can have on their futures. And you know, you have my commitment that over the year that will be a specific focus. The serious case reviews, as you know, we both sit on the serious case review panel, and the issues in relation to how we as not just the council, although this is what we speak to, but generally the learning that comes from that. Often I say that I think that what we are very good at doing is disseminating the information between us as a council and indeed with our partners. The next step that we have to take is how that learning then transcends out into the community. Because, you know, it's more than just a saying to say that safeguarding is everybody's business. It genuinely is. And for me, I think that that's the next step that we need to take moving forward and to continue to build on the partnership working that takes place, not just within the safeguarding board, but indeed with other external agencies, even if it's within the health and wellbeing board. And some of those partners are overlapping. Again, within relation to the school nurses, I can confirm it would have been, in all fairness, on Thursday, but the fact that we had the Youth Congress, that there is a paper that will, and a new cabinet report that will be coming out, and it is looking in particular the contract around our school nurses and what can be done there moving forward to increase capacity. So I'm happy to feed back to you on that one specifically. And finally, in relation to online safety, again, I would just urge, it is something that we look at right across the council. And if I reflect on it, you know, the experiences of our young people today are so different, completely different in comparison to any of us when we were growing up. Even for me, you know, my daughters, it's just like a completely different world. And our young people are living their lives, you know, in the face of, you know, online dangers, for want of a better word. And there has to be more to understand and share that information. I won't go on, but just very briefly, you know, if we speak to, they've got this new app called Snapchat. I don't know if everybody knows about that, and I will take the opportunity to highlight my concerns around the fact that through that app, people can know exactly where you are. And unless young people are aware of it and they opt out, there's a thing called ghosting out, so that nobody will be able to locate where you are. And those are serious issues that we have to highlight and make more of our young people aware of. So my proposal is that moving forward in September, that message just happens to be, ironically, that you've asked that in relation to what's happening with Snapchat, is taken into our schools to highlight the importance of opting out of that. So, sorry to go on.
No, it's important stuff. Thank you, Lisa. Hamida, and then I'll come to
thank you. I just wanted to say that I welcome both reports. As chair of the Safe for Croydon board, there are often many common areas of focus across both reports. So, for example, young people and knife crime is rightly prioritised as an issue, as it is within our community safety strategy. And also FGM is identified as a priority for the adults board. I meet regularly with the independent chair to discuss those common areas of focus, and I find those very useful discussions. On the voice of the child, interestingly, just to share at risk of being anecdotal, some of my experiences at Youth Congress, on my table was a young person who was reflecting on how important it was from her point of view that young people were really properly heard. And when explaining her perspective, she explained that for people she knew, whether that was siblings or people in her social network, not being properly heard could result at an extreme level of knifing other people and going to court as ultimate forms of self-expression as a result of not being able to be properly heard. Clearly, as the lead member for community safety, that perspective will I'll take that away for a very long time. But I just wanted to share that because I was particularly struck by that experience and point of view. So I guess just reinforcing what people have said about the importance of really listening to our young people and ensuring that they have proper outlets to express themselves.
Thank you, Amida, for those comments. Okay, I've seen a number of, but I'll go to Yvette next because I saw your hand first.
Thank you. Equally as important is this report on the safeguarding of adults. And I'm pleased to see the areas of development noted here. So there is, you know, a true focus on where the board is going and where they are implementing new work and new processes. So I'm pleased to see that within the report. I know that we didn't have the opportunity to discuss this, unfortunately, at the last Adult Social Services Review Panel, and I know you promised that this report would come back. I think it's important that we do have the opportunity to look at this in a little bit more detail. And I think one of the points here, which I think is very important, is the proportion of the people who use the services, who find it easy to find information about those services. That is a key issue, I think, in all the work that we're doing, and I hope that that really will be taken on board. I did also ask about the leaflets and credit cards that were produced by the board, and I didn't. I've not seen them, and I don't think you have either. So I think that would be useful for all councillors to see those cards. And yeah, I do hope that we can discuss this in more detail at the panel. Thank you.
Okay, Louisa, can I bring you in to respond to those points?
Yes, absolutely. It will come back to the Adult Social Care Review Panel because, and there we can look at it in much more detail. You're absolutely right. We do have to make sure that people can access the information that they need to access. I was at one of the training events when they did have the little sort of leaflets and credit card things but at that stage it was sort of designed by committee. At that stage, people were sort of throwing in ideas as regards design. So I haven't seen the finished article. I'm sure that the stuff that I see hasn't been. But you are right. It is unfortunate. We thought that the chair would have been able to be here tonight. But it will definitely come back to the Adult Social Care Review Panel, and as Councillor Fleming has indicated, it will also go to scrutiny. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Louisa. I've seen Councillor Sue Bennett.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to say I actually did attend the Youth Congress on Thursday, and I had the pleasure of sharing the table with Councillor Collins. So we just wanted to congratulate. It was actually a very good event. I'm referring to the Croydon Safeguarding Children's Board report, and at the risk of... Sorry?
Yeah, carry on, yeah.
And at the risk of repeating myself, on page 95, it's the FGM report, and it says about the the monthly FGM community support group was launched in December 2015 with 10 regular attendees. And I just wondered, I know that the funding for this stopped, and Councillor Ali did say that something was going to be put in place. Now, this is very important. This is child abuse, as far as I'm concerned, and these children don't have a voice. And I feel it is incumbent on us all to make sure that this is brought higher up the agenda.
Okay, I know we've had this discussion a number of times in council, and I think you're aware of. I mean, I share your views and your commitment, as I think we do all. But I'll ask Councillor Ali to respond again because you're raising it here. Yeah.
Well, Councillor Bennett has said at the risk of repeating herself and, you know, the risk of repeating myself, the commitment remains exactly as I've said previously. What you've actually asked about is in terms of the support group, and that's being funded by the Croydon Community Grants. So that the funding for that never stops. That support group will continue to go on, and we will be maintaining our commitment to the multi-agency work that was led by the previous funding. So all of that work needs to continue. I couldn't agree, should I say, more. So I shall leave it there.
Could I just come back on that? Councillor,
well, it's important. Please do. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I'm really pleased to hear that. So can you please email me with the details of the group so that I might attend? Because as far as I know, it's not happening. So if you just say, I'm really pleased. So just if you could just send it to me so that I can attend the group. Thank you.
Yeah, I have attended the group some time ago, so I'm happy to put you in touch with the organisation that runs it, and you can seek that reassurance for yourself.
Thank you.
I think that will be a good constructive way forward all round, hopefully, yeah. Thank you for that, Sue. Okay, if there's no other questions, can we note the reports and agree the Cabinet report, colleagues, and move on to another very important report that to a degree has been touched on in other reports, but increase in housing supply. Councillor Alison Butler.
Thank you, Leader. This report is really linked to one we brought to Cabinet last time about increasing affordable housing supply, and I think links into some of the questions Councillor Hale was asking. So it is indeed very much about increasing that most important affordable housing supply in Croydon. You can look at the financial savings that will be made within this report, but most important is the difference it can make to families who will be placed in these new homes that will be purchased through the council and then by the charity. We've talked about the council's work on prevention under Gateway and reducing the number of people in bed and breakfast, particularly those families over 6 weeks. And I want to join Louisa. We've got an incredible team that have been working on moving people out of emergency accommodation. And I think it's a real increase when you see those numbers going up in other London boroughs, that at least for this week anyway, we can say ours is at 0. But we do recognise that there will always be a housing need, and these 250 homes will make a difference to Croydon children. And again, it will give us the opportunity to invest right to buy receipts within government restrictions that we would otherwise be unable to do. We continue as a council to recognise the affordability of homes is a huge issue in the borough, and we will continue to look at as many ways as possible to alleviate this for our people.
Thank you. Alison, any questions or comments on the paper? Jason.
Thank you, Leader. A couple of questions on this. I'd question, to a degree, in section, this is section 5.6, it notes in here that this particular type of street purchase scheme doesn't generate significant annual revenue returns, and without the use of the right to buy receipts, it would not be viable at the rent levels of 65% of market rent. And it then goes on to say that it's essential to view the financial benefit to the council through the avoidance of expensive temporary and emergency accommodation. Now, if you can see a direct link between the provision of 250 affordable homes and that will result in a direct reduction of £1 million worth of cost to the council, then brilliant. It looks great, and you can work out your finances on it, and it shows as being viable. Can I be given the assurance then that as these properties come on, you are going to get people who are currently in emergency accommodation going straight into them? Because if you simply add 250 affordable homes within the borough, because we've seen a whole load of other schemes where this has never been mentioned, that it will directly relate to a 4,000 saving per home within the borough. I'm not quite sure that that line can be drawn as clearly as it has within the report. And second question was in the recommendations at the start, 1.6, it says that this Cabinet is recommended to delegate authority, blah, 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 to appropriate land from the housing revenue account to the general fund. I'm unclear of why any land would be necessary to come out of the housing revenue account to the general fund with regard to this particular scheme and recommendation. It may be that it's just left over from a previous paper that's been copied and pasted in, but if it has, can that be taken out? Because I don't see that that is necessary. And the last thing was that in contrast to a number of the schemes that have come forward, this is not about producing new homes within Croydon. This is about effectively changing the sort of tenure and use of existing properties. My slight concern is that if we introduce into the Croydon market an additional significant and long-term purchaser of properties, that it may influence the market within Croydon and indeed make it more difficult for people who are looking to buy homes privately, because the council will start taking them up, and that may result in inflating prices. If that were to happen, there's a significant impact within the viability of the scheme if you see any increase in property prices within Croydon.
I think there's a series of very good detailed questions there, probably a combination of answers. Alison, then I'll bring in Simon and Richard if anything to add. Alison.
I think both Simon and Richard are going to add on this, but certainly within your first question around getting people out of emergency accommodation, certainly any properties that we can bring in that are affordable housing that we can place people on our housing waiting list, whether it's directly off the housing waiting list or people who are in emergency accommodation, creates a bigger pool, and so there will be movement either way. Whichever, if they're coming off the waiting list, then they'll be moving where the properties that they're actually vacating in order for people to move out of bed and breakfast into that accommodation, or it could be by a different and direct stream that way. Your last comment really on the council buying up homes. It clearly can be an issue, but the issue for us mainly, and one that we've got to answer, is the lack of affordable housing supply, the loss of that affordable housing supply that's coming forward, and the number of people who are still presenting to the council as homeless, and we really need to take action to do something about that, and they must be a priority for us. Simon and Richard.
Yes, just to take your last point, actually, in terms of your point about the recommendation, it is the same as was in the report last month. It's unlikely that we would need that because of what we're talking about, but it's, I think, been just included as a fail-safe in case that issue were to arise. In terms of the return, what this report makes clear is that there is a return on this, ignoring the interest saving that the council makes and the potential saving of emergency accommodation, which will occur in some cases, because if you have an affordable housing market that's sort of more appropriately sized, then there will generally be less cases of people needing to go into emergency accommodation. And I think it's worth putting into context also, we're talking about 250 properties, and this is building on what was done under Dudley Mead, indeed, with 96 properties a few years back. We're talking about approximately 1% of the entire housing stock of the borough. So in terms of that materially distorting the market, I think that's unlikely. But so, the fact is it stacks up based on these numbers without including any element of that emergency accommodation. And I think the other piece is what it will free up indirectly by having more of the 2 and 3 bedrooms, so that people who are in overcrowded 1-bedroom units and so on don't have to endure that type of situation, which will often free up other smaller properties for emergency accommodation rather than B&B. So it's that whole system effect that this is responding to, whilst giving us a return at the same time, even without assuming the EA savings.
Thank you, Simon. Richard, anything to add? No, I think that was quite clear. Moving on to Councillor Tim Pollard.
Thank you, Leader. This rather complicated model, and I understand why it's a complicated model, relies on an LLP which doesn't currently exist and isn't yet constituted, coming to an arrangement with a charity which doesn't currently exist and is not yet constituted, in order to make it legally sustainable. I suppose the key question is, the report suggests that it is completely confident that the charity will come to the appropriate arrangement with the LLP. What happens if its independent trustees do not come to the appropriate arrangement with the council? And if we are absolutely confident that they will, does that not surely mean that it isn't an independent charity at all and is actually a council-controlled body?
Well, that's a very good question in terms of how you phrase it, but I think I'll bring in Councillor Hall to answer that. Of course, the short answer, which I think you alluded to yourself, would be if we could have those much-needed reforms and freedoms of the housing revenue account, we'd be able to crack on and do a lot more business in a more straightforward way. Councillor Simon Hall.
And if there weren't the restrictions on right to buy receipts in terms of how those could be used even by the council under the general fund, we wouldn't necessarily need these. Clearly, if suitable agreements couldn't be reached with the charity for this LLP, then these transactions couldn't take place. However, it comes back to the fundamental purpose of the charity in terms of, if you look at the charitable objectives that we outlined last month, delivering this affordable housing with assured short-hold tenancies of 3 years length, 65% market rent and so on, is part of the core purpose of why this charity exists. So it would be quite surprising if the trustees of that charity, clearly independent trustees of that charity, didn't want to further those charitable aims, and it's on that basis we're taking this forward.
Richard, to add?
Just to add to what Councillor Hall's just said, the other element clearly is that the council will be in effect gifting right to buy receipts to the charity to make the LLP sustainable, which is 30% of their costs. The charity won't be able to access free funds like that elsewhere to invest in affordable housing. So the high likelihood, I think, if anyone looks at the business cases, there's a clear shared objective for the charity and the council.
I think that's very clear. Councillor Sherwin-Chowdhury.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a very excellent idea, innovative idea, which is long-term. Council will save a lot of money and provide accommodation for our residents. Just one couple of questions. The property we will be buying is Croydon and surrounding areas. Is this just how far you are thinking from Croydon, surrounding areas? One question. And second, I think the central government always behind to pay back the right to buy money receipt. So how much money at the moment, they're supposed to pay back when we sell the property on basis of right to buy?
Thank you, Sherwin, and I'll get Alison to respond to that in a second. But because I've just been reminded, we actually had a discussion on this paper, because if Theresa May had lost another 7 seats and there had been a different government, then we were going to withdraw the paper and actually implement Labour's national housing policy, which would have been a much more straightforward model of delivering affordable housing. But we are where we are for now, and I'm sure all those involved in the charity will do a sterling job. Alison.
We talked about the values that the charity would have, and one of that is about housing for Croydon people, and in particular nominations from our housing waiting list. And so it's fitting then that any property should be in Croydon or just around Croydon, so that people wouldn't have to move away and they could remain within those support aspects. So that's where we'll be looking to purchase housing and no further, unless it was for temporary accommodation, short-term needs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Can we agree the paper? Can I just bring an update to colleagues? It's not on the agenda, but for Councillor Stuart Collins' groundbreaking campaign to get supermarkets to take greater responsibility for their shopping trolleys being dumped all around the borough. The vote's currently at 53-47 in favour of the supermarkets being held responsible, and I would urge all of you who haven't yet voted to get online and vote and make sure we send a very loud message indeed to the supermarkets certainly in this borough. We'll start in Croydon, shall we? That they need to take responsibility for their trolleys being dumped around the place, along with, I should say, the people who take those trolleys and dump them. End of commercial break. Moving on to scrutiny, agenda item 11. We've got that's to receive the report, but Sean, anything you would want to draw to our attention?
Nothing to add, Leader, on item 11.
Nothing. Can we... no, Jan.
Just to say that I do welcome the scrutiny recommendations that's being brought to Cabinet. These are the Stage 1 recommendations in regard to the 20-mile-an-hour limit, a 3-year impact assessment, and that future consultations should, as far as possible, use one consistent method throughout the borough. And I do look forward to the Cabinet response within the next 2 months.
Thank you, Jan. That's now brought the share of scrutiny back into play. Sean?
Well, if we're moving on to item 12, are we moving on to item 12 now, Chair?
Yes. We note 11 and we move seamlessly on to 12.
Yes.
We're now with Cabinet's consent on agenda item 12. Sean.
Right, item 12. Just like to add my additional comments to Jan's comments. In particular, the 2 items that we were sending recommendations through were on air quality and Surrey Street. In particular, in terms of air quality, even though it's not a formal recommendation, I would strongly hope that both sides can agree that the future of cars will probably be hybrids and electric, and that on item 5 we talk about that the Council joins calls for a national diesel scrappage scheme, and that when the Council does decide to replace their mayoral car, I'm sure we can all agree that it would be a great idea if the new one is electric, or at least a hybrid.
I think we can. Stuart, do you wish to comment without prejudice?
Well, I would certainly add my support for the suggestion Stuart's made, but recognise that I guess ultimately that's a matter for Madam Mayor. But certainly where the Council and where, as a Cabinet Member, I can offer a bit more assurance, we are currently looking at the Council's carpool contract, and officers are looking at how we can ensure we get options in for an entirely electric fleet, which I think would send exactly the sort of message the Chair of Scrutiny is looking for.
Well, can I, from the Chair, add my support to both Sean and Stuart in terms of the future mayoral mode of transport? Sarah, is it in the same spirit or something different?
It is indeed. I'm happy to go and agree with my colleagues on that, 100%.
Right, maybe we'll send a delegation down to the appropriate garage and we'll make a purchase between us. Okay, can we accept the recommendations and agree that and move on to agenda item 13? Councillor Simon Hall, anything to add?
Thank you, Leader. Just to highlight in there the progress that we've made in terms of Bernard Wetherell House with 2 leases for the 9th and 10th floor and also part of the ground floor and first floor, so that we're going to be generating an additional 1.4 million between the 2, thanks to the work that we've done on that.
Thank you, Simon. Delivering value for money right to the end of the agenda, which is good to hear. Any questions on that? No. Thank you very much, colleagues, and enjoy what remains of the evening. Thank you.